At 5 o'clock on a summer morning in 1536, a heavy fog hangs over the River Thames, obscuring the red brick facade of Hampton Court Palace. Inside the sprawling complex, a small army of servants is already at work. Firewood is pushed into cavernous hearths, and kitchen boys tend to grand roasting ovens that are never allowed to cool completely. Deep within the most private and heavily guarded royal apartments, a 45-year-old king wakes in a bed large enough to dominate a modern room. His name is Henry VIII, and every action of his day, from his first waking moment to the late evening hours, is a carefully choreographed exercise in supreme royal authority. Yet behind the majestic facade lies a routine far stranger, more grueling, and more perilous than modern observers often imagine. To understand the atmosphere of Hampton Court in the summer of 1536, one must look back to January of that same year. During a jousting tournament at Greenwich Palace, Henry, fully clad in heavy steel armor, was thrown violently from his horse. The massive warhorse fell on top of the king, who stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds. He lay motionless on the turf, remaining unconscious for 2 agonizing hours. Courtiers surrounding the field were convinced their monarch was dead. News of the disaster quickly reached Queen Anne Boleyn, who was pregnant at the time. Overcome by panic and shock, she collapsed and miscarried days later. Many historians view that brutal fall as the catalyst for everything that followed: the execution of the queen, the king's rapid remarriage, and the dark psychological turn that defined the remainder of his rule. By the time summer arrived, the charismatic young prince who had once captivated Europe was gone. In his place was a brooding, bitter sovereign who walked with a permanent limp. The impact had reopened an old jousting injury on his lower leg, turning it into a chronic foul ulcer that required daily draining and fresh bandages. The king was in near constant agony, and Hampton Court became the central stage where this far more dangerous monarch asserted his absolute control over a terrified court. The palace itself was a triumph of scale and ambition. Sprawling along the riverbank, it encompassed more than 1,000 rooms, 60 acres of landscaped grounds, hunting parks, tilt yards, tennis courts, and kitchen complexes capable of feeding an entire town. Henry had not built the original palace himself. It had belonged to his chief advisor, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who constructed it in the 1520s to reflect his own immense wealth and prestige. However, creating a residence grander than any of the king's own properties proved to be a fatal miscalculation. When Wolsey failed to secure the Pope's approval for Henry's divorce from Catherine of Aragon in 1529, he fell out of favor. In a desperate attempt to regain royal approval, Wolsey surrendered Hampton Court to his master. The gesture came too late. Wolsey died while traveling to face charges of high treason, and Henry claimed the estate as his own. Once in possession, Henry poured vast sums into redeveloping the site. He built a breathtaking Great Hall, remodeled the Chapel Royal, and designed lavish private apartments. To serve the palace, engineers installed a sophisticated plumbing system that drew fresh water from natural springs 3 miles away, transporting it through underground lead pipes into the court grounds. On the wall of the inner courtyard, Henry mounted a massive astronomical clock. This intricate device tracked not only the hours and months, but also the phases of the moon and the high tides of the Thames. Reflecting the scientific consensus of the era, decades before English society would accept that the Earth revolved around the Sun, the clock placed a stationary Earth at the center of the universe. Every stone, window, and decoration in Hampton Court communicated a single message: the English monarch answered to no earthly power. The daily routine began in the king's privy chamber, where his morning rising was overseen by a select group of aristocratic courtiers. These were not common servants, but high-born gentlemen, the sons of earls, barons, and wealthy knights, who competed fiercely for the honor of attending to the sovereign's physical person. Among them, the most influential official was the Groom of the Stool. While the title literally referred to monitoring and assisting with the king's private bodily functions, the position carried immense political weight. In Tudor England, proximity to the monarch's physical person translated directly into political influence. The Groom of the Stool had undivided private access to the king every morning, making him a crucial conduit for those seeking royal favors or political advancement. In May of 1536, Sir Henry Norris held this trusted post, until he was suddenly arrested and executed alongside Queen Anne. In his place sat Sir Thomas Heneage, who inherited both the title and the delicate task of reading the volatile king's morning mood. Dressing the sovereign was a lengthy, meticulous process involving multiple layers of heavy, expensive fabric. First came a crisp linen undershirt, followed by woolen hose, a fitted doublet, and an outer jerkin or heavy gown made of rich silk or velvet. Embroidered with thick gold thread and trimmed with costly furs, the complete outfit could weigh upward of 30 pounds. Heavy gold chains were draped over his broad shoulders, and a flat velvet cap adorned with rubies and pearls completed the ensemble. Every garment served a double purpose, offering physical protection while sending a clear political signal to the court. The choice of colors and fabrics signaled whether the king intended to conduct serious diplomatic business, participate in light recreation, or sit in formal judgment. Throughout this ordeal, the gentlemen of the chamber had to handle the king with extreme care, dressing a man whose infected leg made every movement painful. With his attire secured, Henry proceeded to the Chapel Royal for morning mass. The Royal Chapel was, and remains, an architectural masterpiece of the Tudor era. Overhead, an extraordinary wooden vault ceiling, finished in bright cobalt blue and gold leaf, featured delicate carved pendants hanging like golden stalactites. Henry did not sit among the general congregation. Instead, he attended services from the elevated private royal gallery, looking down through decorative screens. This allowed him to observe his court without being subjected to direct scrutiny. The king's personal piety presented a strange contradiction during this tumultuous period. Although he had formally severed ties with Rome 2 years earlier, naming himself supreme head of the Church of England, Henry remained deeply committed to traditional Catholic theology. He heard Mass daily and believed fervently in orthodox doctrines such as transubstantiation. In his own mind, he was not a Protestant reformer, but a devout Catholic monarch who had simply removed papal authority from his realm. This religious stance created a dangerous environment for his subjects. Under Henry's rule, individuals could be burned at the stake as Protestant heretics for rejecting traditional Catholic sacraments, or executed as traitors for supporting the authority of the Pope. Within the court, reform-minded advisors like Thomas Cromwell were constantly locked in subtle conflict with traditionalist conservative nobles, while the king manipulated both factions to solidify his absolute authority. The Chapel Royal was also a major center for music, housing one of the most accomplished choirs in Western Europe. Dozens of trained singing men and young choristers performed alongside skilled organists. Henry himself was an accomplished musician who played the lute, organ, and virginals, and he actively composed sacred and secular music throughout his life. Morning Mass was therefore an immersive musical event with complex polyphonic harmonies echoing off the gilded ceiling. For the king, it was a display of genuine religious devotion. For the courtiers standing below, attendance was a non-negotiable political obligation. To be absent from morning Mass was to invite immediate suspicion regarding one's loyalty. Following the church service, Henry took his morning meal. Breakfast in the Tudor era was functional rather than lavish, consisting of fresh bread, light ale, and modest portions of cold meats or fish. The meal was viewed primarily as a physical necessity to settle the stomach and provide energy for the day's duties. Once breakfast was concluded, the primary administrative work of the realm began in earnest. By the summer of 1536, England was undergoing a massive structural shift. Thomas Cromwell, serving as chief minister, was actively managing the dissolution of the monasteries, the largest redistribution of property and wealth in English history. Religious houses across the country were being systematically surveyed, closed, and stripped of their valuable metals, jewels, and lands. The confiscated estates were appropriated by the crown or sold off to noble allies to build a network of loyal landowners. The economic yield for the crown was extraordinary, but the social impact was profound, sparking deep resentment that would erupt later that year into the massive northern rebellion known as the Pilgrimage of Grace. All of these complex national policies were directed from the council rooms of Hampton Court. Henry met regularly with his Privy Council, reviewing official dispatches, foreign correspondence, and financial reports. Contrary to popular depictions of the king as an indifferent tyrant who left administration to his subordinates, historical records reveal that Henry was an extraordinarily active, hands-on ruler. He reviewed documents personally, writing sharp marginal notes, amending language, and debating policies aggressively with his advisors. He spoke fluent French, read Latin easily, and possessed a deep understanding of European diplomacy and complex theological arguments. Foreign ambassadors frequently noted his sharp memory and impressive grasp of international affairs. He could recall the precise terms of a treaty or letter from months prior, demanding to know why specific directions had not been carried out. Yet, working alongside the king was a dangerous occupation. The atmosphere in council meetings was charged with quiet anxiety. This was the very year Henry had sent his own queen to the scaffold on dubious charges of adultery and treason, accompanied by several high-ranking courtiers, including his trusted companion, Henry Norris. The political lesson was clear. Past service, personal intimacy, and high nobility provided no protection if the king turned against an individual. Thomas Cromwell was well aware of his own vulnerability, having watched his friend and predecessor, Sir Thomas More, die on the block just 12 months earlier. Every recommendation made to the monarch was carefully calculated, as a single misstep could lead from the council chamber directly to the Tower of London. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, the entire court gathered in the Great Hall for dinner, the main meal of the day. The hall was an imposing space, measuring nearly 100 feet in length, with a soaring hammer-beam roof 60 feet above the stone floor. Elaborate tapestries, woven with silk, wool, and gold thread, covered the walls, depicting biblical scenes and classical histories. The king sat at the high table, positioned on a raised platform at the far end of the room, elevated above the rest of the court like a living monument of state authority. The scale of the food preparation required to support this daily spectacle was immense. The palace kitchens comprised 55 separate rooms, managed by a staff of over 200 people, working continuously to feed upwards of 1,000 courtiers, servants, and visiting dignitaries. There were dedicated rooms for butchery, roasting, baking, boiling, and pastry construction. A specialized spicery handled precious imported seasonings such as saffron, cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger, while vast cellars stored hundreds of oak barrels containing wines imported from France, Spain, and the Rhineland. Annual court records reveal that the Hampton Court kitchens consumed more than 800,000 pounds of meat, 600,000 gallons of ale, and 75,000 gallons of wine every year. The food presented at the royal table offered an extravagant display of variety and abundance. A single meal featured numerous courses, each consisting of multiple distinct dishes. The menu included venison, beef, mutton, pork, wild rabbit, pigeon, swan, and peacock, often presented with their feathers intact for visual drama. On fish days, the kitchen served salmon, pike, carp, eels, and porpoise, which Tudor dietary rules classified as sea fish. The quality of bread served as a direct indicator of rank. Fine white wheat bread, known as manchet, was reserved exclusively for the king and top nobility, while coarser, darker loaves were distributed to lower-ranking staff. Beyond physical nourishment, dinner in the Great Hall operated as an intricate social theater. The seating chart was a precise map of political influence. How close an individual sat to the king's table, on which side of the room, and which dishes were placed before them communicated their exact standing at court. Courtiers closely observed these daily arrangements, searching for subtle shifts that might indicate a rival's rise or fall from grace. In a high-stakes environment where political favor meant survival, dining placement was studied with absolute seriousness. Henry himself ate heartily. Despite the physical limitations imposed by his leg wound and his steady weight gain, his appetite remained robust. He consumed substantial amounts of roast meats, rich stews, and sweet pastries, accompanied by Gascony red wine or Rhenish white wine. In accordance with contemporary customs, he ate primarily with his hands, using a personalized knife to cut portions and using pieces of bread to gather sauces. Modern forks were viewed with suspicion as an unnecessary foreign fashion and were not widely adopted in England until much later. Between courses, attendants performed formal hand-washing rituals, pouring rose-scented water over the king's hands from heavy silver jugs into polished basins. If the weather remained clear, Henry devoted his afternoons to outdoor pursuits. Prior to his severe jousting fall, he had been regarded as one of the most athletic princes in Europe, excelling at wrestling, tennis, horsemanship, and martial tournament sports. Although his jousting days were now over, his passion for field sports remained strong. Hampton Court was surrounded by extensive royal parks comprising over 1,000 acres of enclosed woodland stocked with red and fallow deer. Accompanied by his master of the horse, trusted companions, and pack of hunting hounds, the king spent hours in pursuit of game. Despite enduring intense physical discomfort from his swollen leg, he remained determined to stay in the saddle, using field sports as a vital release from the pressure of state governance. On mild summer afternoons, he also engaged in hawking, flying trained falcons across the open fields along the river. As the afternoon light faded over the brick courtyards of Hampton Court, the king would return indoors, preparing for an evening of quiet music, private meetings, and strategic planning, continuing the relentless performance of absolute power that defined every hour of his life. The royal mews at Hampton Court were home to a collection of highly trained falcons and goshawks, overseen by a staff of falconers who ranked among the most well-compensated specialists in the king's service. Henry would often set out along the banks of the Thames or into the sprawling meadows surrounding the palace, a hooded peregrine falcon perched upon his leather glove. He would release the bird to hunt herons and other waterfowl in a display of precision and patience. Compared to the thunderous intensity of a deer hunt, hawking was a more reflective and quiet pursuit, yet it carried immense social weight. The specific species of bird a person was allowed to fly was strictly dictated by their social standing. Only the monarch was permitted to fly the gyrfalcon, the largest and most prestigious of all raptors. This was yet another example of how recreation and hierarchy were inextricably linked in the Tudor world. At court, even your choice of hobby served as a public declaration of your status. On days when the weather or his health made hunting impossible, Henry might turn to the real tennis court he had commissioned at Hampton Court. Real tennis, often called royal tennis, bears little resemblance to the modern game played at Wimbledon. It is an indoor sport played within an asymmetrical court featuring sloped roofs known as penthouses. The ball is significantly heavier, the rules are far more intricate, and the gameplay demands a rare blend of raw power and tactical subtlety. Henry was a genuinely gifted player and had been devoted to the sport since his youth. Even with his leg injury in 1536, he continued to take to the court, though he likely lacked the explosive agility that had once stunned visiting foreign dignitaries. Beyond the tennis court, the palace grounds provided archery butts, bowling alleys, and meticulously designed gardens for the king's recreation. The Privy Garden was Henry's personal sanctuary, a walled retreat filled with aromatic herbs, vibrant flowers, and sculpted topiary, where he could walk away from the relentless scrutiny of the court. In 1536, this garden represented one of the few places where Henry could experience something resembling solitude. Yet even here, the isolation was an illusion. Guards were posted at every gate, and the gentlemen of the Privy Chamber remained just a few paces away, always within earshot. Privacy, in the modern sense, was a luxury a Tudor king could never truly afford. As the afternoon light began to fade over the river, the palace shifted its focus toward the evening. Supper was typically served between 5 and 6 o'clock. While it was a lighter meal than the midday dinner, it remained an extravagant affair by any other standard, featuring a vast array of meats, wines, and breads prepared by the kitchens throughout the day. Supper served as the transition into the night's festivities, the time when Hampton Court truly sparkled. Henry was a sincere devotee of the arts and maintained a permanent ensemble of musicians, including players of the trumpet, sackbut, shawm, and viol. Organists served in the chapel, while lutenists provided a backdrop for his private hours. In the evenings, the halls of Hampton Court were filled with music. The king would frequently participate, picking up a lute to play alongside his professionals. He was a composer in his own right, and while courtiers were naturally inclined to praise his work, the surviving manuscripts indicate a genuine musical intelligence. He possessed a sophisticated grasp of melody and harmony, and music remained a stable comfort in his life, even as his political and personal worlds grew increasingly volatile. Gambling was another pillar of evening life at court. Henry was a dedicated player who bet enormous sums on cards, dice, and various games of chance. Official records frequently note payments made to settle his gambling debts, proving that the king was by no means invincible at the table. The losses could be staggering. On a single night, Henry might lose the equivalent of tens of thousands of modern pounds. For the king, however, the money was secondary to the social utility of the game. It was an opportunity to sit with his courtiers in a more informal setting and observe them closely. He watched to see who handled the loss with grace, who became desperate as the stakes climbed, and who was obvious enough to let the king win on purpose. These minor character studies were integrated into the broader political strategy that Henry was constantly refining. Dancing was also a staple of the evening, though by 1536, Henry's participation had begun to wane. His leg injury made prolonged physical exertion agonizing, and his increasing weight made the graceful movements of his youth difficult to replicate. Nevertheless, the court continued to dance under his watchful eye. He would sit in his great chair, observing the nobility as they moved through the measured steps of the pavane or the more spirited rhythms of the galliard. Jane Seymour, his new queen, was a quiet and reserved figure during these gatherings. In stark contrast to the intellectually sharp and politically assertive Anne Boleyn, Jane projected an image of serene compliance. She sat beside the king, spoke only when addressed, and avoided the bold, attention-seeking behavior that had characterized her predecessor. Historians still debate whether this was her true nature or a calculated strategy for survival. Regardless of her motivation, Henry clearly found it refreshing. After the turbulence of his marriage to Anne, Jane's perceived tranquility was exactly what he craved. Jane's private apartments were linked to the king's by a secluded gallery, allowing Henry to visit her without passing through the public areas of the palace. Throughout 1536, the entire court was on high alert for any sign that the Queen might be pregnant. Henry's desperate need for a male heir had already triggered a break with the Roman Catholic Church, the casting aside of Catherine of Aragon, and the execution of Anne Boleyn. Jane was acutely aware of the pressure. Her entire future rested on her ability to provide a son. While she appeared calm in contemporary reports, the internal stress must have been overwhelming. She spent her evenings occupied with needlework and the company of her ladies-in-waiting, maintaining a household that was pointedly free of the political intrigue that had defined Anne's circle. As the night progressed and the candles burned low, the court began to retire. Courtiers returned to their own rooms or to nearby lodgings, while Henry withdrew to his privy chamber, the most restricted zone of the palace. Here, the public mask of kingship was partially lowered. His heavy robes and jewels were removed. The groom of the stool and other trusted attendants helped the king undress, applying fresh bandages and poultices to his chronic leg wound before preparing him for sleep. The privy chamber at night was a confined, almost claustrophobic environment. Guards were stationed at every exit, and yeomen of the guard patrolled the halls with halberds. The king slept in a massive, canopied bed, in a room kept warm by a fire, tended through the night by a page. His mattress was filled with soft down, layered with expensive linens, and topped with furs. Yet, even in the dead of night, Henry was never truly alone. There was always someone nearby, ready to jump at his slightest command. The paranoia that increasingly colored Henry's later years was most evident in these sleeping arrangements. He lived in constant fear of betrayal and assassination. In 1536, these anxieties were grounded in reality. He had recently sent a queen and several high-ranking men to the scaffold. In the north, the rebellion known as the Pilgrimage of Grace was gaining momentum. To a significant portion of his subjects, he was a tyrant. To others, he was a heretic. The man who closed his eyes at Hampton Court each night was not merely exhausted, he was profoundly vigilant. This is why examining a single day in 1536 is so illuminating. Every hour was saturated with hidden meaning. The morning routine was a political ritual. Attending Mass was a test of religious loyalty. Council meetings were treacherous exercises in power. Dinner was a visual map of the social hierarchy, and hunting was an act of defiance against his own failing health. The evening's entertainment was a form of surveillance disguised as leisure. Finally, the night in the privy chamber was the time when a man with the power of life and death over millions lay awake, wondering who among his inner circle might be plotting his downfall. Hampton Court in 1536 was far more than a luxurious residence for a wealthy monarch. It was a sophisticated machine built to project absolute power while shielding the man at its center from the fallout of his own ruthlessness. The 1,000 rooms, the army of servants, and the rigid rituals of daily life were not just displays of vanity. They were the physical and social architecture required to sustain the myth that the king was divinely chosen and beyond the reach of his enemies, even as those enemies included his own former friends and wives. Throughout the day, Henry moved through these layers like a performer who could never step out of character, playing the role of the king from the moment he woke until the bed curtains were drawn. What is most striking about this existence is the total absence of true privacy. Every meal had an audience. Every prayer was scrutinized. Every walk was monitored. Even the most personal aspects of his physical life, his bathing, his dressing, and the treatment of his injuries, took place in front of a gallery of courtiers. In 1536, the King of England lived in a gilded cage. He held total authority over his realm, yet he lacked the one thing he needed most: the certainty that he could trust those closest to him. That doubt followed him through every hour, and it would only intensify as more ministers and friends were sacrificed to his will. Outside the royal bedchamber, the palace never truly slept. In the kitchens, boys tended the fires for the morning's bread. In the stables, horses were readied for the next day's ride. Laundresses worked through the night to ensure the king's linens were pristine by daybreak. And in the silence of the inner sanctum, Henry VIII, supreme head of the church, King of England and Ireland, lay in his great bed with a pained leg and a mind that never stopped weighing the risks of the coming dawn. Tomorrow, the entire performance would begin once again.